welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by a comics creator who's here to discuss an absolutely beautiful and extremely fun and funny and touching graphic novel. So hello, welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yeah, I'm Ricky Lima, and I wrote the book Undergrowth along with the illustrator Daniele Aquilani. And it's a graphic novel that's coming out September 3rd, next week, actually. So very excited about that.
Oh, great. Congratulations on the upcoming publication. I am so excited for folks to read it because it really is a tremendous amount of fun. I'd love to start off talking about your career and your journey into comics. We were just talking about your other work before we started recording. And I'd love to know how has your career outside of creating your own comics influenced your career in your other spaces?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of like all melded together. So it was back in like 2011. And I was like, well, comics are great. I was like getting really into comics. I think at that time, people were just kind of I mean, comics have always been literature, but people were just starting to realize that there's more to comics than just superheroes. And so I was part of that. And I was like, wow, this is like something that's really interesting. So then I started thinking about how I would do it myself. And then 2012, by the end of 2012, I self-published like a short 8-page comic with my friend David Bishop. And then I was like, publishing comics is awesome. So then I just started self-publishing comics from there. And then in 2016, I found myself without laid off from a job, and I was like, "Well, what would I do?" And I was like, "Well, I really like making comics. Maybe I can get into publishing." So here in Toronto, they have at Humber College, they have what's called a creative book publishing program, and it was a summer intensive course. It was about 3 months, and you learn every aspect of publishing. It was like fantastic. And but what really struck me was the production aspect because production of like book production is so much fun because it's almost like arts and crafts, but at the same time you're like making books. You know what I mean? And it's on such like an industrial level too that it's the machines you're working on is just so cool. So after I graduated from that program, I got a job at a publishing house here in Toronto called Coach House Books, and they print the books themselves, like at the publishing house, which is like really cool. So it's a very kind of artisanal publishing house, and so I got to learn a lot more about physically making books while I was there. And then from there, I went into House of Anansi Press, which is probably one of the biggest independent publishers here in Canada. And so now I'm the production manager there, handling both children's books and nonfiction books and fiction books. And so that's really kind of upped my production levels again, because now I'm working with like, even bigger printers, and it's pretty amazing. And all the while I'm doing all of that, I'm still publishing, self-publishing comics. And I think that that really has benefited my comic making because oftentimes at like shows, people be like, wow, what? This is self-published? They can't believe it. And I take pride in that. I'm like, yeah, you know what? That's right. These self-published books, they're looking pretty professional, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, I love that you sort of get to experience all sides of the industry and how they all sort of can, those experiences all get to sort of enhance each other. You have some nice synergy throughout your career there. So I'm really interested in what the inception point for Undergrowth was. Was it a particular character? Was it the world? Was it an image or an idea that you wanted to explore?
Yeah, I think with Undergrowth, I was really kind of on my previous project that I did, I was like kind of burnt out and I was like, I don't know what to do. So I took like a bit of like a research break where I just took a break just to in consume as much media as possible. And then what really stuck out to me was like the mech genre, like Gundam and Evangelion and stuff. And what was really cool was how they deal with trauma and how these kids are like going through so much, but at the same time, there's really cool robot battles. So as I was watching that, I was really inspired. So I was trying to think about what my take on that would be. And then so I started writing. Originally, it was just like a really big action story that was like my main focus. But then as I was going, I was like, man, what about these characters? And then the characters started to build up. And at the time too, I wasn't having like the greatest time. You know what I mean? Like it's not that I wanted to like die or anything, but I definitely didn't want to like continue to struggle, like, you know what I mean? Like you definitely don't want to just continue, but you don't want to end it. So I was dealing a lot with kind of that idea. And I think each character in the book, and pretty much every aspect of the book, kind of deals with the trauma of living and how each character deals with that. And that's something that I really wanted to explore as well. And so that was kind of like, how each character explores trauma in a different way. And it was almost a way of me kind of exploring which way I deal with stuff and like how I would relate to these characters. So, I guess it's kind of like me putting myself in each character and being like, what would I do here? Or what would this person do? Did that benefit them? Probably not, maybe not. I don't know. So, you know what I mean? So there's not really answers to anything, but the exploration of like dealing with trauma and dealing with situations like that, I think was the real kind of thrust of the story. So while action was what started it, I think the exploration of the human characters is what brought it to the finish line.
Hmm. That's so interesting. And that does, I think, make a lot of sense for the characters and how they react to what is happening to them. I am going to ask you to describe our characters and the situation they find themselves in. But just given what you just said, I think it's really cool that like each character sort of in a way is like experiencing a different aspect of trauma and how you process it. Yeah, so let's talk about Red, her friends, and yeah, like what they're dealing with at the beginning of the story.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, like they start off the story trying to watch a meteor shower, and that's kind of how it all starts. But their planet is being invaded by four invaders from beyond, I guess. And so while they're watching, so the elders of this town, I guess it's like Earth, I guess Earth adjacent, I don't know. But the elders of this place have told everyone just to kind of continue living their lives and don't bother the invaders because if they don't bother you or if you don't bother them, they won't bother you. But one night while they're doing the stargazing, one of the invaders shows up, and Bloom, who's like the hothead, she's the one who deals with everything very aggressively, and she just can't put up with it anymore. She's sick of it, and she kind of stands up to one of the invaders, and then that results in them being unfortunately ended that night. But they're brought back to life by the spirit of the planet who wants to fight back, and they're given these giant organic mechs to fight back. And then that's pretty much where our story starts. It starts at the rock bottom, pretty much.
Hmm. Yeah, I found the beginning so gripping because you're sort of thrust into this world where this is happening and you're experiencing it through the eyes of a bunch of young teens, like kids. And it's very overwhelming for them. And I think it's overwhelming for you as a reader too, in a way that really hooks you. They're all really smart and clever and like a little precocious in some places, but they also like really think and act and talk like kids in a way that feels very authentic. And I'm wondering, like, do you think like that was something that you paid particular attention to while you were writing them?
Yeah, I would say so. I think the characterization of their voice came a lot from the art as well. So I worked really closely with Daniele to come up with, well, I mean closely, like he did it all. Like he's the designer, right? He did it. We just talked about it, and he came up with some really strong character designs, and that really inspired the voice that you hear inside of them. And for me, I mean, it's very subtle, but you can tell from like chapter one to the end, the characters' voices really start to develop because as more art started to come in, I could see how the words would form inside of their mouths and everything. So yeah, I think the strength of his character designs really kind of informed the voice. And just like the facial expressions he would give them and the way he would frame them, I think really kind of inspired how I would write. So so overall, like someone like Red, she's very kind of like laid back, laissez-faire kind of woman. And the way Daniele would draw her with like her facial expressions being very kind of like whatever really informed how I was doing it. And I think that's my favorite part of what he was doing. It was the facial expressions. So yeah, I think, and I remember there's even a point in what the design process where I was like, oh, can we make Red younger? Because he had her being a little bit older. And I was like, well, let's make her younger. And then that's when the voice really started to come about. So
Oh, nice. Yeah, the faces are excellent. Like I think it is such a great skill in comics to make faces like seem like in what are essentially static images, make them seem really dynamic and mobile and it's so well done.
yeah, and not like awkward. Sometimes you could draw like a face of like a surprised face, and it's kind of awkward, and you're like, "There's something wrong here." But the way Daniele does it, I think he's got a perfect balance between like realism and cartoons. Like the way some expressions can be very cartoony, but then at the same time they could be very serious at the same time, and I love it so much.
What was the process of, if you want to call it choreographing or plotting fight scenes? Because those are also very dynamic. And I'm curious about where like writing and the art intersect in that process.
Ooh, I mean, that's a tricky question because I will admit that my action scenes are very bare bones. I'm kind of like, all right, and then they enter in the room, this happens, that happens, panel two, this happens. There you go. And it's really kind of Daniele who's the one who brings it to life, you know what I mean? And that's the reason why I'm working with him is because he is such a good artist. Like he has a degree in comics. Like he went to school in Italy for like, comics. It's crazy. And so it's one of those things where you really have to trust the artist and really have to give them the agency to produce something that's really great. And for me, that's what I really love about comics is how collaborative it is. And so there's like a scene, I mean, no spoilers, but that scene near the end when the scientist takes over the other ship, that was pretty much all Daniele. I just said, look, we have like, I don't know, maybe 5 pages if we want. You could choreograph this however you want. And then he was the one who developed that storytelling there. Like, I mean, there's that scene, again, no spoilers, where, you could see the reflection of the scientist in the cracked mask. And you're like, I was like, oh man, that is the coolest image ever. And that was all him. You know what I mean? And they always say, you're as strong as the weakest link in the team. And like, maybe I'm the weakest link here because he was killing it. I was just kind of going along for the ride. You know what I mean?
It's a really great team because you have a great colorist as well. And comics is super collaborative. I sometimes think that like comics are for obvious reasons most often compared to books, but there's like a lot of that's like movies about them too, just in terms of production, because you have a lot of voices at play that kind of affect like the final product.
Yeah, totally. And I think comics is the greatest because it's the best of movies, it's the best of books, and it's the best of art. You know what I mean? It's just the best combination of everything. And I really want more people to read comics. You know what I mean? And it's funny because there's such a different kind of literacy behind it that I don't think a lot of people understand. And they'll just read the words and they'll be like, yeah, it's fine. But you're kind of missing like 50% of it. You know what I mean? So you really have to change the way you read in order to figure out the way that the images and the words come together. You know what I mean?
It's true. It is a different sort of reading that you have to learn. And I kind of remember as a kid, like hitting that learning curve at first before I really kind of got the rhythm and where to put your attention when, you know, it's a skill for sure. Mhm.
And I mean, you came from writing as well, and you know that the writing of it as well is just it's a whole other process. You know what I mean? Because now you have to distill images into boxes, or relatively boxes, single moments. So writing those moments, you have to really choose what to write and what to show. You know what I mean? And that's the trickiest part, man. But it's so much fun. I love it.
It is. I'd love to talk a little bit about world building, if we could, especially when it comes to like our point of view characters who are young and who are like very passionate about what they're doing, but also very like overwhelmed and sort of small feelings sometimes in the face of it. I'd love to know like how your storytelling aims like shaped how much information you revealed about like what was happening to them at the outset, because we are dropped into it a little bit. And that makes sense because like they wouldn't know a ton about what was happening to them, even if it had been happening for a while. So like, yeah, what is your approach to world building? And like, how do you know when to reveal stuff and when to hide stuff?
Yeah, it's funny because yeah, I mean, thank you for the compliment on the world building. And there was a review as well. I was like, oh, vivid world building. But I never thought of myself as building a vivid world. It's weird because I don't think okay, so what I do, the biggest or the best piece of advice I ever got for writing was that your audience's imagination is better than anything you'll ever write. 100%. And when I heard that, I was like, damn, that is 100% true. And that kind of makes my job a lot easier, right? Because now all I need to do is plant the seeds of ideas in the story so that the audience can be like, oh, okay, this is why this is happening, and this is why this is happening, and there's this and that. And they're kind of creating the story themselves. And I'm just here just kind of poking them in that direction. You know what I mean? So I'm not actually doing anything. So when there's well, that's a lie. But I think when it comes to world building, it's important to create things that people are like, oh, what is that? Or very curious points that then they kind of think about. And then they'll kind of make connections within the world and be like, okay, this is where that came from. This is where that came from. Like in the story, you'll notice that everyone has these bracelets on. And the funny thing about the bracelets was it's never talked about in the story. It's never talked about in the book. And it was like very, very early stages of the book. And I was telling Daniele that everyone is kind of prisoners to the robots. Like I was thinking literal prisoners in cages. And so he gave them these bracelets as a way of, their handcuffs, I guess. But then that idea changed and it just never was brought up again. But now these characters have these bracelets and it's like, okay, what is that? What is going on here? How come everyone has that? And that's another thing where people now will think about, okay, how does that work out? And metaphorically, they are prisoners within the world, so it kind of makes sense. You're like, okay, I get it. But then also aesthetically, it looks pretty cool. I think it looks slick. So it's one of those things where it's the world building is not explicit, but I think that's what makes it vivid, or at least hopefully, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. Leaving a lot to the imagine suggests a larger world than you can sort of perceive in the confines of like this little panel. So yeah.
And you can allow people to have discussions about what things mean. And I think that is so important, you know what I mean? I never want to give people the answers or even give them my answers because my answers might be different from what someone else's answers are. And their answers are just as valid as mine, even though, I wrote the book, quotation marks, like, I don't know what is really it's kind of like going back to the George Lucas thing. Like, does he own Star Wars? Does he like, you know what I mean? Is it even his anymore? Like, no. So that's yeah, I'm really passionate about allowing people to engage in the work and not kind of shut any kind of conversations down about it. So I think that's super important.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, this is just like a lovely book, and I think it has a really great message for its audience about like how to act in the face of like insurmountable forces and how to live in really hard times, which is, unfortunately pretty relevant to our age. So what is next for you? Are you working on anything else right now or?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of other stories. As a writer, it's difficult to like, I mean, you got to pay everybody. And so like, you want to pay them fairly. You want to give each project its attention that it deserves. So there's a lot of ideas I want to do, and there's some that I just can't physically do. But yeah, I'm working on a book right now with Brazilian artists, and it's called Soda Pop Pirates. And that's being self-published right now. And it's just kind of we're working on the story. And that one, it's tough because it's like, even explaining it, it's like a vampire adjacent pirates because like they can consume their enemies and then it gives them powers but they don't want to do that anymore, but then one of them does. And so it's still in the early stages, I'm still kind of working it all out. But there's certainly other projects I'd love to do. I need to find people who want to work with me, and I want to find publishers who allow me to put it out there, you know what I mean? And I'm all for self-publishing, but it's a lot of money, you know what I mean? And so either I got to strike it rich or I don't know, something. But
Yeah.
you know.
Well, then I'm going to be speaking right now to not only our listeners, but to artists and publishers to check out
Yeah,
this book and to get in touch if you feel like you want to collaborate, because I would love to see more stories from you. I'm
perfect.
very excited about Soda Pop Pirates. Like pirates and vampires are two great tastes that, I feel like you're going to taste great together. So well, thank you again for coming. This has been really great. And listeners, again, I would love for you to check out Undergrowth. By the time that you hear this, it will be out in the world. So please head to your favorite comic book store, independent bookstore, library, perhaps, wherever you like to go for books. Okay, yeah, it is time to close this chapter. Goodbye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.